Joined by lovely John, her husband, but we had an error of communication.
Title of the presentation.
No, he's a different person. Anyway, John is currently at home looking after the children, so you've just got Rosie today, but you'll do a good John impression, I'm sure. I've already told them off at this, they say I'm just a student nurse. Like, this is the very amazing Rosie, and I would ask that you give her your 100% attention. Again, slight trigger warning, some of this might be a bit sad, but we're going to cope with that. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome everybody, thank you for having me here today. This is my second time talking at the conference, so hopefully I've got some idea what I'm doing. My name is Rosie Gill-Moss. I am the host of Widowed AF. Widowed AF is a podcast which celebrates widows. So I invite people to come on, they tell their story, and it's become the leading UK's widow podcast, which is quite an accolade, I think. So in order to tell you a little bit about how the podcast came to be, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me. So, okay. So, my husband Ben died in 2018. I was only 37. I had two boys who were 7 and 5, and I had a daughter that was 6 months old. My daughter was in my arms when the police knocked at the door to tell me that he'd gone scuba diving and he hadn't returned. You probably hear my voice wobbling, even nearly 7 years, it still gets me. It was, without doubt, the most catastrophic, life-changing event that's ever happened to me. I thought I was going to completely crumble. I didn't think there was a way out of it, and here I am in front of you. So normally I would have had John with me today. Now John is who I affectionately call my live husband. We remarried, he's also a widower. And he normally comes here because he's got lots to talk about in terms of terminal illness. He's not here, so we're going to kind of skip through his slides. But on the next slide you will see a QR code. If you do want to hear his story, that's a link to the podcast. Okay, so when you're widowed, it's very, very lonely, particularly if you're young, and actually 37 is quite young. It probably doesn't sound it to some of you, it is. And one of the greatest things I have found in this kind of, I'm going to use the word journey, I know it's horrible and cringy, but I am going to use it, is the people I've met. I joined a support group called Widowed and Young, and through that I made a network of friends. And these friends are still in my phone, we call the Widow Witches, we've got a WhatsApp chat. And it's been one of the greatest honours to watch them get through this enormously traumatic experience and go on to live their lives. Okay, COVID. I'm going to drop in a little bit about COVID here because this is something that many of you have been affected by. My live husband, after we've been together about 6 months, we just announced to the world that we were going to be in a relationship very tentatively, worried that people were going to judge us. March 2020. He got COVID and he got it so badly that he spent 4 weeks in ICU. He was admitted to Maidstone Hospital. I was told he'd been there for a week and he was in there for 5 weeks. I had the phone call that nobody ever wants to get. That one where they say to you, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Now he did survive, and one of the reasons I mention this is that the contacts I had with the hospital during this time, this terrifying time, was with nurses. It was the nurses that would ring me, the nurses that would speak to me, muffled through their PPE, and would try and tell me what was going on that day. Those people, they also, actually I won't list this bit out, they were also the people that held up an iPad to him, and he asked me to marry him for the ICU ward. So they were there at that moment. So this is just kind of just to reinforce to you how front-facing you guys are, and how you won't just be dealing with the patients, you're going to be dealing with the families, the very frightened families. Hopefully not COVID. So we were given a second chance, essentially, and those second chances don't come around that often. But we were both alive, we were both well, and I decided that I needed to make some significant changes to my life. I was a very problematic drinker. I always have been. I'm more a divergent, you can probably, maybe you will be able to tell. And I had a drinking problem essentially from when I was about 14. And this, when Ben died, I leaned very heavily into alcohol. I was secret drinking. My mum was living with me, bear in mind I'm 37. I was hiding bottles of booze in the bin. I was a functioning alcoholic, and I did it behind a veneer of respectability. And I still got my kids to school on time, I fed them, they were clean, they were loved, you know, and they weren't neglected, so it sort of went beneath the radar. But I was so scared to reach out for help for fear of judgment. I was scared that social services would become involved. I was scared somebody would take my kids away, they considered me unfit. Again, emotional. And I think there's something there to be learned about when some people come to you in crisis, when they're desperate, when they're frightened, it's that empathy, it's that compassion, it's understanding that nobody drinks or uses drugs or takes risks, you know, engages in risk-taking behaviours unless they're hiding from something, okay? Alcoholism, drug addiction, they normally come with a cause. So, different subject, but I just wanted to make sure we covered it. Okay, for simplicity and inclusivity, I refer to anybody who has lost a romantic partner as a widow, regardless of your age, sex, gender, orientation, or even if you were even together at the time, because sometimes couples separate, particularly when there's mental health involved, and then that person might die, and they don't really know where to identify. So in my world, they're a widow. So I've always wanted to write a book, ever since I was a little girl, and I didn't anticipate writing a book about being widowed. Here we are. But as I mentioned, ADHD, and getting things down on paper, very problematic. So I had this impulsive, again, on brand idea of doing a podcast. I've got no background in broadcasting. Essentially, it was an iPad on a towel to try and help with the echo, and me and my friend started to interview people. Interestingly, I've never had to recruit guests. Apart from when I initially launched it, I've had people come to me. I'm going to give you some stats in a minute, but I've spoken to over 120 people who've been widowed, and I think that really shows you how important it is and how much people want their voices to be heard, and how much people actually want to hear them. And I do believe there's a power in stories. I'm here today with you telling you my story, and I don't think there's any better way of the human connection. So the podcast was born. The first episode was aired in January 2023, and I can still remember when we got 500 downloads and the excitement. You know, this is it, I've got a new career. It hasn't made any money yet. Now, the reason I wanted to do something, I talked to you about being widowed, and particularly being widowed young, and feeling very alienated. Okay? I didn't see anybody representing me. I didn't know if I had to wear a veil. I didn't know if I had to wear black. Could I wear makeup? Like, could I laugh? All these things I didn't know. And it's a lot of, I'll touch on the behaviours when you're widowed, there's a lot of shame around it. We might feel shame of how we react. A lot of people engage in heightened sexual activity after they're widowed. It's called widow's fire. I was not prepared for that. It's also to educate and inform, because what I've realised is so many people want to help and they just don't know how. And also, this is a weird statistic for you. If you're in a romantic relationship, one of you's going to be widowed. When you put it like that, it's really important that you know what it feels like, what it looks like, that you're not scared and alone. And I thought people would come to my podcast a little later, because as the name, the F stands for what you think it does. And I thought people would come when they were ready for a bit of dark humour, ready, sort of like over the arc, as it were. But actually, what I'm finding is people are listening to me in the first weeks and months. I mean, it's quite terrifying, really, that I'm the guide, but I wanted to be the voice that I needed. I wanted to provide a guide, literally, to talk you through this process, because it is terrifying. Okay, this is the thing. This is my stuff. So this makes me feel a bit warm inside, because, like I said, this was just me, an iPad and a towel at one point. I've got a studio in the garden. My husband is responsible for that. And he has learned how to produce and edit podcasts. We've created Silver Lining Media. I have another podcast, chatting there, if anyone's interested. And it's been listened to in over 30 countries. So many of my guests are from America. I've had people on from South Africa, Australia. It's become a global podcast, which is both daunting and it feels a bit like my fifth baby, if I'm honest. Okay, so in the summer, we talked a little bit about the importance of tribe, belonging, coming together. We hosted our first festival, Woodstock 2024, and it was bloody brilliant. It was brilliant, and we walked together, people went all widows, we had live music, bar, it was just brilliant fun. And actually, I should have said to you, I didn't actually say that I'm sober, did I? I told you I had a drinking problem. I'm nearly 3 years sober, there we go. And it's the greatest thing I've ever done for myself, but if I told myself that 10 years ago, I wouldn't. And this festival, I danced. So getting sober, I've been to funerals, weddings, I've done all the hard things, but I haven't been able to dance. And I did, and I sang. I can't sing, I'm not going to give you a demonstration. But that to me is where this power comes, you know, bringing people together. It's all very well having online groups, but when you come together, and as I mentioned, that's Chatty A, that's my other podcast. Not so death related. Okay, so this is really in terms of when you guys are going to meet the families of people that are perhaps terminally ill. And they are not prepared for what's coming up the road, okay? They might think they are, and somebody might have been terminally ill for a long time. They might have all their plans in place, funeral, insurance, you name it. We're still not prepared for what's coming up the road. And the impact of a death, it's not only on the partner, it's also the children, okay? There's a really big issue here, the children. And I am now writing my book, and the chapter that had me sobbing at my desk was the one I called What About the Children? Because as a child, the worst thing you can imagine happening is that your parent dies. It's the crux of most Disney films, right? It shows resilience. And for a child, this kind of really big fear has happened. So then there's going to be a need for support for them as well. It also impacts the community, because it can ricochet through a community. People become scared. I'm thinking of COVID here, you know, somebody in the community dies of COVID, everybody's terrified, right? So, when you're talking to somebody who's recently lost, or it actually doesn't even have to be recently, when you're speaking to somebody and you find out they've lost their partner, I think compassion, understanding and honesty are really important, but I do think that empathy comes first. You may not have any first-hand experience of this, but so much comes across in the way you deliver news, the way you express yourself, kindness, time. I know that you guys are going to be rushed off your feet. You know, I'm not an idiot. I know that the NHS is overstretched. But when you're speaking to them, if you can take the time to take their hand, to just give them a compassionate smile, you know, be kind in the words you use. Give them time to sit with the body. I mean, I never thought about this because this didn't happen to me, but some of my guests have spent time sitting with the body and they've found that incredibly powerful. So these are just some things to consider. And the other really big one is only promise what you can deliver. Don't say you can save somebody if you don't know you can. You know that. Okay. So the person that you meet after bereavement is not going to be the person they were before. You are irreparably, I can't say that word, irreparably, you know what I mean, changed. And you may meet bereaved people in different circumstances. They may come to you with mental health issues. They may come to you with severe anxiety, PTSD. There's a litany of reasons that you might meet somebody who's been widowed. I myself have suffered terribly with my mental health. I went into complete crisis about 2 years ago. Perimenopause had an impact, I'm not going to lie, but I presented to A&E. I was desperate, and I was not met with compassion. We'll put it that way. I was very frightened, and I was told that if I was to leave, that the police would be called. And that made me feel very trapped and very scared. So again, it's understanding that people's behaviours may be affected by this bereavement, and that it is going to have a long-term impact. So you, as part of your reading, may have come across on Death and Dying. It is probably the pinnacle book on grief, and it's where the 5 stages of grief come from. It's actually quite an old book. It was written in 1969. There will be a new book out next year, which is a little more up to date. But when I heard these 5 stages of grief, I thought this is linear. This is linear. I have to work through these. I get to acceptance, and I'm all good. That's not the case. I had to accept that Ben was dead very soon. His body has never been found. Okay, so it was 7 years in March and his body has never been found. So accepting something that terrible when you have no tangible evidence is really, really difficult. I had to remove all ambiguity from my language for my children. You know, I had to bring those little boys into my arms and say to them, your daddy has died. I don't wish that on anybody, but I had to use that language, and we had to accept it. If I had said to them, Daddy's lost, they'd be hoping for the rest of their lives, right, that he's going to come home. He was off the coast of the English Channel in March. It was freezing, but there was no way he survived. I also had to go to High Court to have him legally declared dead because no body, no death certificate, no life insurance, mortgage payments keep going, it's precarious. So acceptance has to come quite quickly. Accepting that the life you have now is not the life you planned, that comes a little later. So this idea that you work through these stages and you pop out the end a healed human being, it's not true. It's not true. You're going to go back in. In fact, this diagram is a much better visual. It looks a bit more like that. Mm. So for example, I will think that everything is fine, and then I will need a day in bed staring at a wall. Grief attacks. Liken it a bit to landing in a different country. So many of you may have travelled. Many of you may be from different countries. Now imagine landing, you've got no guidebook, you don't speak a word of the language, so Google translates. What do I do? What do I do? And I was just so desperate, and I thought, I had counselling. I mean, the first counsellor I saw, she said, oh, I Googled you, you used to look so glamorous. Thanks. And essentially, there isn't a guide to being widowed. Every single unique experience of grief is just that, it's unique. But what I have noticed through all the research that I've done is the common threads. The way that we respond, we will all go through those processes along with the all. But you have to go through it. It's a bit like a book, the children's book, Bear Hunt. You can't go over it, you can't go under it. You've got to go through it. It's like a bomb. There you go. The bomb picture, but it's like a bomb that's detonated in your life. So these are just some ways that grief may affect us. These are kind of comorbidities, if you like, of grief. And these are things that people may come to you with and presenting. So brain fog, tearful, fear, quick to anger. Oh my God, I was horrible. I used to storm out of WhatsApp groups at the slightest indiscretion. We become quite impulsive. There's that kind of need to cling on to life, to find the dopamine, to find some joy. And that can manifest in sex, drugs, shopping, alcohol, sounds like a good weekend. But it can also be lack of sleep, poor nutrition. We call it the chicken and wine phase because there's a lot of wine and fried chicken being eaten in this process. There's not a lot of, you don't really care. You're just eating to survive. Lack of exercise. We all know how good for you exercise is. I mean, it's a pretty big ask when you're grieving, but it could be something as simple as walking a dog. A lot of my widowed friends got dogs because they found it forced them to get up and out, they didn't have children. Lack of self-care. I remember a friend coming round and getting into bed with me and saying, babe, please wash. And then you've got the low mood, anxiety and overwhelm. And I am going to touch on neurodiversity. This is not a presentation on neurodiversity, but people I've spoken to in the widowed community, they have managed to go through their whole lives undiagnosed or managing their ADHD or their autism. When something like this happens, I'm not a nurse and I'm not a medical professional, I don't know why, but perhaps it's that you become so tired that you cannot hide it anymore. You unmask. So if you then begin to get more brain fog, how do you know if it's grief or neurodiversity? These are just things to consider when you're speaking to people, that perhaps there is more going on as well. Okay. The journey, I told you I was going to say this word. So the journey is that when I describe this is when my husband died, I felt like I was a pack mule and I had the 3 kids and I had all these responsibilities and I had this hill that I had to get to top of. And I don't know how long it was going to take me. We slid back down many, many times, but we made it. And you can look back when you get to the top of that mountain and you can take a little look behind you and you can think, bloody hell, I did that, But you do have to take action and you do have to make choices, and those choices are hard. It's a lot easier to choose to be defined by your grief, not use it as an excuse, that's too harsh, but to hide behind your grief. I can't do this because, and actually, you have to get a choice, and the people that make the choice, they're the ones that do heal, they're the ones that go on to build fulfilling and happy lives. I have a fulfilling and happy life. I'm still really, really sad, but accepting that I was going to be both happy and sad is what's enabled me to heal. So I'm just going to, I think we're finished actually. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask me? Good one, someone else. Not even when my music. In which case I shall hand you back over to Claire, but if you do want to find out any more, It's Widowed AF, there's an Instagram, you can find us on we've got a website, and I'm Rosie Gill-Moss. Thank you very much for having me.